Welcome to the Burial Plot Horror Podcast with Brenda Tolian and Joy Yaley.
Welcome to Burial Plot. Prepare yourself for procession into all things writerly and spooky. I'm horror writer Joy Yaley, and I'm here with my co-host, the talented horror writer, Brenda Tolian. Good morning, Brenda.
Good morning.
And today we are joined by Josh Schlossberg. Josh is the co-founding member of Denver Horror Collective and a member of the Horror Authors Guild. He served as editor for the best-selling, award-winning anthology Terror at 5280, and is the editor of the upcoming Jewish Book of Horror anthology. Josh's biological horror has appeared in Apthotic Realm, Disturbed Digest, Demons, Devils, and Denizens of Hell, Volume 2, Campfire Tales 2, Bards and Sages Quarterly, the Rock and Roll Horror Zine, and elsewhere. His debut novella, Melanie, is available from D&T Publishing. Thank you for joining us, Josh.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Josh, can you tell us a little bit, first of all, about what the Denver Horror Collective is and how you went about founding that?
Right. Well, you folks are, of course, a part of it and on the steering committee. So basically, it was back in 2017, I believe, and I had been a part of some other writer critique groups, and I would bring in my horror stuff, and some people would like it, and that's fine. I realized people weren't really into horror there. I brought in my story called Hangina, which was about a man who starts to have a vagina growing in his hand, and people were like getting all grossed out, and it's like, grow up, people. And so I was like, this is not my group anymore. Not that they didn't like the story. Most people seem to not like that story, but the fact that they couldn't handle that, I was like, these people aren't even into horror. This is not even necessarily a group where they're giving me useful feedback for the most part. So I was like, I need to start up something where it's a critique group just for horror folks. And I went to Georgetown. There was a Ghost Town Writers Retreat, it was called, and it was a thing that had a lot of panels, and there were a bunch of horror authors from locally, and I met a few folks there, including Gary Roby, who is still very heavily involved, and we were talking about, let's start up a little critique group thing. So there ended up being 4 of us, and we were critiquing one another's novels, and that's how the whole thing got started, and then it grew into more critiquing, and then events, and publishing, and a whole bunch of stuff.
Great. Yeah, I was at that writer's retreat as well, but I didn't meet a lot of people because I had a stomach bug for the whole thing. So I would go to some of the panels and then go back to the hotel and sleep.
Understandable.
So it wasn't very fun, but yeah, that was a great event. I would like to see some more of that kind of thing happening when COVID releases us all from its grip.
Indeed.
So one of the things that I was looking at as well, Josh, is that you're going to be the editor for the Jewish Book of Horror, which is a new anthology put together by the Denver Horror Collective. And are you still open for submissions, or has the submission window closed on that?
Submissions end at the end of the month. It's a holiday called Lag BaOmer. That's the end. I think it's the 28th of April. So that's when we're cutting off submissions. So still time. I'm still getting some trickling in. We've had about 65 submissions thus far. So yeah, it's been pretty exciting. And just to mention, obviously the book is about tying into Jewish people, Jewish culture, and Jewish folklore mythology, but you don't have to be Jewish to submit. We are going to probably end up having a larger percentage of Jewish authors, but that is not a prerequisite.
And when is the possible release date for that anthology?
So that's going to be Hanukkah in 2021. So that will be in the fall.
I am definitely looking forward to that one. That one sounds amazing.
Are you getting a good amount of diversity in stories? Or are you getting, I know you were worried about just getting Gollum stories.
What's funny is we didn't get a ton of Golem stories, and
Oh, I think
maybe because I warned people or scared people off from that. I did just get one in my inbox today. That's a Golem story. So yeah, probably just going to run one Golem story, and I have yet to decide which one is going to be in there because we didn't want to just do the things that are the first things that come to people's mind. Of course, we have to have a Golem story. And for people who don't know what a Golem is, it's basically a rabbi puts the name of God on a big, not stone, but clay monster to protect the Jewish people. And it's a cool thing, and I support it, but I didn't want to just have that. And then there's a Dybbuk, which is basically, it's kind of like a ghost, almost like a succubus sort of thing without the sex. And it's in Jewish folklore, and that's cool. And we're definitely going to have one, maybe two of those, but I wanted to examine other aspects of the culture. And for me, it's not just because I'm super Jewish. I mean, I'm fairly Jewish, as in culturally. I was born to a Jewish family. I went to Hebrew day school. I got my bar mitzvah. I'm aware of all that stuff. I studied the Holocaust in college. I'm not religiously Jewish, and I'm a bad Jew, is what they call people like me. Yeah, I'm a secular Jew. I think the culture's cool, like the underdog culture and all things like that. So I was just thinking of what's another interesting angle on horror. My main goal is to get more horror out in the world. And this is actually it's not explored as much as it could be. I'm not 100% sure why. I think because a lot of folks are squeamish and maybe obviously non-Jewish people are probably not going to put this out there, and Jewish people are like, well, do we really want to associate? In my mind, I'm like, yeah, I do want to associate with that. And I have no problem with any criticism. We haven't really gotten much criticism, but I'm hoping for more. So then more people are aware of the book, frankly.
Well, all publicity is good publicity. That's what they say, correct?
That's what I found. But I did one critique I got was funny because in the call for submissions, which I don't even know if it's going to be the final language for the book blurb, but said something about, the horrors that the Jewish people have gone through, of course, the Holocaust, and before that, for thousands of years before that, things like that. And then also I said something like the horrors of inheriting neuroses from your overbearing mother or something like that, like a joke. And somebody put a thing is like, I think it's like you're really stigmatizing the Jewish mother. And it's just like, all right, please don't submit to this anthology. Like if you think that's the intention of this, is like to get back at my mom, or that's some like, so it's it was like a way to warn off people who I don't really necessarily want to affiliate with. That I do want some irreverence and humor. At the same time, I know the Jewish culture and I have a lot of respect for it. I'm not going to let anti-Semitic things into it, or even things that distort the history or anything like that. So I just thought it was funny. That was just one critic who didn't even pass it along directly. They passed it through another person. It's like, so I just thought that was an amusing thing to mention. But I'm really looking forward to it. We have so many diverse topics, so across the board. And I don't want to really give stuff away, but of course we have a Holocaust story. I don't want to make it all Holocaust stories, but I can't ignore the Holocaust, right? And so it goes across the board. And it's going to be a lot of stuff that you would not expect. And I am constantly wowed with the submissions. And in fact, I stopped calling the quote slush pile a slush pile after this, because it's like that's not a fair word for what these submissions are. In fact, I would go on a limb and say literally every story is good. It's just a matter of what needs to fit in. And this is the third anthology I was a part of, because I helped publish the Consumed Tales Inspired by the Wendigo, even though Holly and Henry were the editors. I just did some copy editing for that. But I was witnessing the process, and so many pieces are just so good. And what I know now when I submit is it's not just, I'm like, what? My story was written well. I had a cool idea. That's not necessarily what's going on there. It's the editor's vision. And also maybe there was another story that was similar to yours, or even there's a concept called killing your darlings, of course, that applies to you have a little scene or a quip or a phrase in your story, and you love it so much and you realize it actually doesn't fit in. You got to pull it out of there. That's the same for being an editor. So the good news is just because your story is rejected does not mean it was not a good story. In fact, I will be rejecting many very, very good stories.
I think that's just the way of it. I keep all my rejections in a file. And I actually read something really cool yesterday, because I was snooping out publishers for my thesis, and one publisher, and I forget which one it was, maybe it was SST or something like that, said, don't think of your rejection as, you wrote something that was just like terrible or something. Just think about that, you sent something in and maybe somebody touched on it with a better hook or something like that, just a tiny little difference that made them stand out a little bit more. And I've always been really blessed with people giving me really good feedback, even on rejections, because that's how we learn, right? And stuff.
Right.
I've been rejected far more times than I've ever been accepted.
Oh.
And that's fine.
It's not even close for me. It's not even, it's like 1,000 to 1 rejections to acceptance.
Yeah, well, I think the project is like really, really exciting. I know I've been posting about it for you on the Horror Writer Association, and the amount of interest in it is huge.
I think
almost
it will be. Yeah,
almost like people were just dying for a moment to be able to, especially those that are Jewish, a way to be able to share their culture and be able to participate in their Jewish culture in a way too,
Exactly.
through horror. So I think you're offering this as a wonderful opportunity for so many. Hey, good job.
And yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm learning a lot about my own culture in a way that's making me re-interested in it, because I've been reading into Jewish demonology. I'm like, okay, I found my way back into Judaism that interests me. And so my new novel, which some of you are familiar with, that I'm working on, actually ties in Jewish demonology. And so it got me re-inspired and all that. And then, there's the whole myth of like Jews drinking babies' blood. The uncomfortable thing is I personally do that, but it has nothing to do with the fact that I'm Jewish. So I want to make that clear. It's not a Jew thing. That's just a personal preference.
My daughter was just studying that story. She was studying it because it was blamed for something in Ireland. She's doing Irish studies or something, and that was the first time I'd ever really kind of heard that as being like they actually killed a guy back in the early, like during the potato famine or something. Like they killed a guy because they believed that he was Jewish and they thought he was drinking baby's blood. It was so weird.
Yeah, blood libel, they call that. Yeah, it's not true, obviously. Again, except for me.
Except for you. What about, now you're going to start, you're either starting or in the middle of launching, I think, a biological horror podcast. And you also write in that genre like a lot. So could you give us an overview for those who don't know what that's about, may not be familiar?
Yeah, so my little brand, Josh's Worst Nightmare, I've been calling biological horror fiction. I used to call it microbial horror because that's literally what I wrote about, stuff like that behind me. Viruses, parasites, bacteria. Nowadays, of course, it's a moot point, right? We live in biological horror. So I'm also always interested in nature and the natural world. I've been an environmental activist and journalist and things like that. So I always wanted to incorporate that into my horror. And I have a collection, I believe the world's largest collection, because no one's contested me on this, of nature-based horror. So books about killer slugs or anything to do with the natural world basically killing humans. The plot's the same every time, but I don't care. I collect them and I love them and I love the titles. And so this concept, my concept of biological horror, is a bit broader than what you might hear out there. Now, most people don't hear about biological horror at all, but usually when you hear that term, it's to do with, some sort of disease or contagion or something in the environment contaminating people. And that's definitely a part of it. But for me, I make it a lot broader. Anything to do with nature. So if it's to do with forests, a focus on forests, right? Things in the natural world. If it's to do with, say, some sort of, in my mind, like a climate change horror book, sci-fi would be a form of biological horror, to do with biology. So I'm really stretching the definition, but anything to do with the body. Now we have the term body horror. I almost see that more as like the squeamish, torture-y kind of stuff, which personally I'm not that into. I'm okay with that stuff, but I don't personally write that. But that, in a sense, could be biological horror, but for me, it's more like, are we dealing with some sort of, I wrote one story that nobody wanted about kind of a hearing loss situation, and it tying into maybe something supernatural. So anything to do with the body, anything to do with nature, anything to do with microbes. Basically, the only thing that doesn't fit is, like, our supernatural is not necessarily biological horror. However, there's often overlap, and in much of my stuff, it's both. So there is this biological component, like a tick that is spreading some disease, and then you actually find out it's this something entirely different. That was a prior book that I wrote. So that's my general concept of biological horror. And that's what the podcast will be about. I'll be focusing on those elements. So inviting horror authors on to talk about maybe one element of biological horror that's relevant to them. And then we'll be able to get into just other horror related topics or their work.
That's very cool. I'm very excited for, I guess you could say I have a little bit of that in my thesis I just finished, but nothing at the level that you're writing. And, again, I've also follow you as an activist with your other podcast. What is it? Green, help me.
Green Root Podcast.
Yeah, and stuff. So, you're always, we'll just say you're definitely brave in all you do, whether that is challenging people over COVID or fighting for nature or writing your horror. That's really awesome.
And just to be clear, I don't challenge people about COVID existing. It's the opposite. I'm challenging.
I mean, just you're just being brave about it, and well, you've even gotten death threats, for God's sakes. Just trying to keep people safe. That's all you're trying to do.
I'm just pointing out that, hey, there's a pandemic out there and maybe we should do something about it. And to me, that hit close to home. Well, literally, because I've been studying pandemics and all that basically since H1N1 and writing about it in my fiction, but also in my journalism and whatnot. So when this was all coming around, I was like, okay, well, we can figure this out. I'm like, well, at least I'm in America. At least I'm in the US, the place where we'll handle this the best. And they're like, guess what? It will be the place that is almost the worst. And it's like, well, that I didn't predict. So
yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy here in my town because our numbers went from like 9 and now we're way up in the double digits right now because people are just being kind of dumb.
Yep. So that's part of what I write in the horror stuff. I'm obviously not going to be writing pandemic stuff. I did write a pandemic novel a while ago. Nobody wanted to touch it. Like, oh, this is so irrelevant. And it's like, yeah, good, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, now it's in current events.
Now it's too cliche. It went from being irrelevant and into cliche in a matter of years. So
yeah, I didn't see wearing face masks as being such a huge political thing. I live in a very conservative area where my town commissioners have actually, or county commissioners have said the pandemic's over. They declared it over in my county. So, yeah, many years ago, I worked for the Department of Defense as a contractor. And one of the things that we did after 9/11 was to run what we called war games. So we would all sit at this table and come up with different ideas of ways that we felt the country was vulnerable. And every scenario we ran, the biggest threat was the general public.
Of course. Yep.
So there you go.
Always the case. Yep. Well, so luckily for folks who don't care about life, it gives me more fodder for my writing. So thank you for inspiring me.
Yeah, I saw a post that you made about the anti-mask rallies, and you were like, "Oh, so it's not really anti-mask; it's pro-virus." I was like, "Yeah, it totally is."
Well,
Oh my gosh!
Well, that's what's funny is my novel that I wrote years ago, and I can spoiler alert for a thing you'll never read. It's called Pandemonic, and it was about a cult that worshipped viruses as their gods. And so to get up in the stages, they would
That's
have
awesome.
to spread increasingly virulent diseases to get up in the echelons of the cult. And that I thought was a cool idea. And it actually occurred to me, because I think you were going to ask me at some point about inspiration for ideas. So during the H1N1 thing 10 years ago, that was a blip on most people's radar. But to me, I followed it very closely for a week saying, this is the end. So I was in the middle of, I was a radical environmental activist, and I was expecting the world to end at any minute. And then that came along. I was like, this is it. And so I was poring over the news, and there's this listserv of journalists who were posting all this stuff so I was paying all attention to that. And then I was like, well, that sucks. I don't want to die. And then part of me is like, well, what if the viruses, we're only here for the viruses? What if humans just exist as mechanisms to spread viruses, which are the true gods? And I started going down that train of thought, and I started writing a book about it. And then I did all this scientific research, which suggests that our certain aspects, I mean, we are nothing without bacteria, of course, and other microorganisms. And then everything down to the mitochondria, the energy makers in our cells, are thought to be basically captured microbes that just started growing inside of our body. I was like, crap, this is actually already real. We are just transportation mechanisms for the virus. So the idea of, these people who are advocating for the virus, they're basically the cult members in my book that I wrote like 12 years ago. So,
you should put that back out there.
Absolutely.
You should
turn it into a screenplay or something.
Or at least share it with us. We'll read it. I would love to read it.
We'll see. It's also, as you know, as a writer, when you look back on stuff you wrote before, it doesn't seem very good. And I thought the idea still stands. I think the writing was limited. And it also didn't fit quite into a category. I made it satirical and then humorous, and then it was a bit of thriller and a bit of horror. Publishers hate that. Like, agents and publishers, they want to be able to, what's your box? What movie is this like? So we can say, Peter Benchley on steroids, or whatever. They love that. And if it's something that's too out of the box, it's not appealing. But now it's too in the box. It's too like no one would care anymore about it. I missed the boat.
Dang it. I'd read it. I'd still read it. So
it was a fun one. It was definitely a fun one.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I was driving home yesterday, and I was listening to something on NPR. I can't remember what I was listening to. But it was basically along those same lines, that maybe we are not the dominant species on the planet like we think we are.
Not.
That it is microbial or viral or whatever. And, when you think about that, that's actually a little bit terrifying, in any construct. That's just like, wow. Yeah, we're just here. Because I think they were saying that, the virus can't move on its own, this particular virus. We have to spread it around. And it's like, we're our own worst enemies many times. Humans are. So.
Well, what's funny, the idea came to me during that H1N1 as a comforting thought. It was like, well, we're here for them. It's okay. We're their worshipers, and so that's actually why it occurred to me. Strangely, it was my mind's way of just being, it's okay. This is how it has to be. These are your lords. So serve them.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of truth to that, I think. Okay. Welcome back to Burial Plot, where we're speaking with Josh Schlossberg about his creative process and his biological horrors. Hi, Josh. How's it going?
Doing good.
Good. You've already talked a little bit about your creative process and where you get ideas. We know that you have a new novella out. Is it pronounced Millennia or Melanie?
Maline.
Maline. I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier in the intro.
It's confusing. I wasn't sure how to pronounce it honestly until I released it, because there are lots of different. It could be Malini, it could be Maline. There's lots of ways, but basically the main.
I practiced it a lot.
She did. Well, Brenda did the voiceover for the trailer. So.
Right.
But Melina is the name of the main character, but Melina is also a tidal phenomenon, and then there's the plural for that, which is Maline. It could also be pronounced Malini. Who the hell knows? So I'm just saying Maline. Call it whatever. Pronounce it however you want is fine with me.
So, where did the idea for that particular novella come from?
Well, that actually came from real life as well. So my maternal grandmother had been going through Alzheimer's, and unfortunately she passed away a couple months ago, but I'd been very close to her, as I have been with all my grandparents. And about 10 years ago, started noticing some cognition differences in her. And so I was watching that happen. It was a very slow unfolding. So even towards the end, when she passed away at 95, we still have conversations with her. She was still present. It would be intermittently how much in touch with us she'd be, but she was always there. And the aspect I noticed also a lot, and perhaps as a man, I identify with the fact my grandfather, he passed away in 2019, but he at age 98, he was witnessing this unfolding. So of course, if you are dealing with Alzheimer's, that's a hard thing to write about, and you may not even necessarily quite be aware of it, and I don't know how to write about that. But writing about a husband who is watching this happen to his loved one, that I wanted to really explore, because I would notice it was affecting my grandfather, of course. And so that was what it was all about. And this isn't a spoiler because it's in the trailer. You find out that the Alzheimer's is the least of what's going on in Maline. It's a much darker force, but that's kind of the way he starts taking a look, like there's something else going on with her. And like, no, it's probably just the Alzheimer's. And there's a lot to it, because that would make a better story than just, here's a guy dealing with Alzheimer's. Isn't that a bummer? And that wasn't the purpose of the story. I try to make my horror, believe it or not, to a certain degree uplifting, at least at some point. I want people to earn their stripes, basically, to push through the darkness and come out the other side, whatever that may look like. And that's what I do in Melina. And it was a tribute to their situation. The characters are not them. The plot has nothing to do with them. The setting is in South Jersey, so I utilize that because it's relevant to the plot. But yeah, the characters obviously nothing to do with them, but they're that exact situation, a woman who is dealing with these mental cognition difficulties, and then there's the man he's dealing with physical issues. So he can't walk, he can't get around very well. She can scuttle all over the place though. And then there's caregivers involved, and that was basically where the idea came from. And it's out now, actually, if people are interested. We're doing a pre-release through Godless, which is an indie horror distributor. So my publisher, D&T Publishing, and they're doing some amazing stuff in the horror world. Like, they're putting out so many books, so many anthologies. It's amazing, including my own, obviously. And so Godless is this indie horror distributor. So starting last week, it's been out there as ebook. And then on the 23rd through Amazon, as I call them, it'll be released as ebook, paperback, and we're doing hardcover as well. And we have plans to be getting into brick and mortar bookstores as well. So hopefully it'll be available through things like Powell's Books, which you can do online, or you can go to IndieBound, which is a way to find out if your local bookstore has it. And if they don't, you can order it through them. And, do it. Amazon helps with the author profile and stuff like that, but I don't care for Amazon.
We were hoping you'd be willing to read a little bit from your new novel.
Sure, I could do that. Let me just pull up the stuff, and so
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have it ready, so you might need to edit this part out. Here we go. Yeah, I'm not going to read very long, but I'll just read from the beginning because that's the way to trick you into buying it. So, Maline by me, Josh Schlossberg. All right. All I wanted for my 86th birthday was a nice supper with my beautiful wife. But try as I might, I couldn't help but fixate on Melina's open-mouthed chewing from across the kitchen table as she forked up chunk after chunk of baked salmon. Supposed to be a scorcher tomorrow. Think you'll break out the bikini? I joked in hopes of distracting myself. Her auburn eyes glazed as a taxidermy deer's. She gulped down yet another morsel of pink flesh as if I hadn't said a word. I sighed and picked at my rice pilaf, no longer hungry. Last fall, when I started to notice her difficulty recalling names, her conversational non sequiturs, her staring off into space, I'd get annoyed, certain she was being lazy. At our age, the brain is like a muscle that goes slack without exercise. While the winter diagnosis of Alzheimer's came as a heavy blow, it was also a bit of a relief to pin her odd behavior on something concrete. Then, over the last 2 months, she began to go downhill fast. Her episodes, which ranged from slurred, nonsensical mutterings to mute, near catatonic mental absences, tended to be worst in the evening. Sundowning, Dr. Kochav called it, but they could happen any time. Daria, our head caregiver, strode into the kitchen, smelling subtly of jasmine. Who's ready for ice cream? She thundered in her thick Barbadian accent, hands on wide, cushiony hips. After doling out generous portions of salted caramel into bowls, she left again to tend to some household task. I nibbled a few spoonfuls as Melina, unselfconscious as a toddler, lifted the bowl to her mouth and slurped it down. Once sprightly and quick-witted, my wife had devolved into someone I barely recognized most of the time, a blurry, low-resolution copy of her former self, like a photograph Xeroxed one too many times. Where she used to light up any room she entered, ashamed as I am to admit it, those days the approaching rasp of her shuffling slippers made my mouth go dry. And I'll leave it at that uplifting note.
Oh, yeah. I'm currently reading it. I did get my copy from Godless, and it was very easy to copy all the files to where I need them on my Kindle and all that kind of stuff.
Good.
One of the things that I enjoy so much about your writing, Josh, I think I've told you this before, is that I'm almost immediately sucked into the character's world. And I want to be a part of that world, and I want to find out what's going on. And I mean, I'm only 3 chapters in, and I'm already invested in this. I love the characters. So good. So good. I thought they were based on your grandparents. So it was interesting to find out that they're not, because they're so real.
Yeah. The people themselves, the personalities, it's not. But what I do is I'll take a shell of a concept. And so that, so basically it's these other people living in a version of my grandparents' house, which is kind of weird because that's the only thing I can't make up is physical, like houses. I can't make up houses. I have to base them on. I struggle most, I'd say, with doing that setting. And a lot of people, that's the critique I get in the critique groups. Like, well, show us the room. And I'm like, it's just a room. I don't know. You figure it out. So I have to I end up putting a lot more time into that. That's the hardest part for me, is not even the natural descriptions. It's just like the prosaic descriptions of a street. It's like, what a street looks like. No, I have to describe the street. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I think, because we critiqued this as well, so I'm sure it's changed since we critiqued it. But one thing, and I brought this up during my class yesterday, was that you got to make your reader care about your characters. And that was one thing that definitely came through when you were just, still working on this piece, was like, we cared about both of these characters. We cared, the sadness because they're parted because of the dementia in a way, and how, he still loved and cared for his wife, but she was turning into this, other thing. And then sometimes she would kind of not be that other thing. And, right away in the first part of the story, you're just like, you're thinking of your grandparents, you're thinking about, people you care about and you really connect. And so, when the horror hits, it's going to hit hard because you so much care about these characters, and you do that really, really well.
Thanks. Yeah, and I want to definitely thank you and all the folks who were part of the critique group. So I had shared that through, there's a good pitch for Denver Horror Collective's critique group. So we have a short fiction critique group, and you don't have to be in Colorado even to necessarily be a part of it. Just you can become a member, and we're doing these online virtually. But the short fiction critique, and then we have these novel writing groups where we do long-term looking at people's pieces, and that was instrumental in me writing this, being inspired to write it, and then the critiques I got for improving the aspects and changing all the things around. So yeah, that's just a pitch for critique groups in general. If you're writing stuff on your own and no one's looking at it, you got to open yourself up to that. In fact, critiquing others, I would say, is one of the best skills you can develop for your own writing. That's what I'm realizing, not just getting your own critique. And a lot of people don't like the critique groups because then people are going to say, people are going to say some things you disagree with, and sometimes people will say things that don't even make sense for you, and that's totally fine. But overall, it's I find it to be a hugely beneficial process.
Oh, just finishing my thesis, if I hadn't been a part of Denver Horror Collective, it might have been a lot more painful. And that's actually what I talked about yesterday in the same group was, you got to have a community. And yes, I have like Horror Writers Association community and stuff like that. But Denver Horror Collective is a little bit more than that to me in some ways. It's almost like a little family of writers that I know will be really honest with me and, really want to see me succeed. And so doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be Denver Horror Collective, but finding your community is so important, and supporting each other, and successes and when, it's been a rough critique or whatever. So I do thank you for that. I mean,
Absolutely.
Meeting you all through the Denver Horror Collective has honestly changed my writing life, and I've made some good friends along the way too. So.
I totally agree with that. I was struggling to find critique groups. I live in a small town. There's not a lot happening. There is a writers group in my town, so I joined them. And for the first several meetings, I didn't submit anything because I was just trying to figure out how does this all work. And then I did submit something. It was actually, there's something up there which was published in the 5280 anthology. I submitted that. And I didn't think it was that horrifying. I mean, it's not, there's no gruesomeness in it or anything like that, really. They asked me to not come back.
That's awesome.
I was like, oh, okay, sure.
People who don't like horror should not be critiquing horror. It's just not useful. Maybe they can have useful things to say about the mechanics, but if you're not into the genre and you don't understand the genre, it's pointless, frankly.
Yeah.
But then, it's spoiler alert, it's a Bigfoot story. And one of the critiques was Bigfoot is not real.
Fiction. You know what fiction? Yeah, well, that's a great story. And so that's a pitch for Terror at 5280. It's the local horror fiction anthology that Denver Horror Collective put out. So we have some big names like Carter Wilson, Stephen Graham Jones, folks like that, and then some soon-to-be big names, folks who are local authors who are been getting their stuff out there, and then folks who just really started and was their first publication credit. So we did utilize a fair amount of Denver Horror Collective members, but not only. And all the stories take place in and around Denver and Colorado. We wanted to use that setting and really focus on that local aspect. But people can do that anywhere across the country or the world, the idea of place-based. And so it did pretty well. It's still getting out there. We have it in ebook, paperback, and we have it as audio book. And you go to denverhorror.com, and it's in our project, denverhorror.com/terror 5280. It's easy to find out there. Definitely recommend that. And frankly, I don't put much stock in what establishment entities say, but we did win a best book awards from American Book Fest in 2020 for best anthology, and we got to a finalist as the horror category, and it was a Denver Post bestseller, which basically just means we sold a lot of books in 1 week. That's just so when people hear bestseller, don't let it sway you one way or another. It literally means that week it could have been one day there's a bunch of sales. So just that's one interesting that I learned. It just like, and I'm sure we won't get into this much because it's boring to most people, but the whole marketing and what a lot of these things mean behind the scenes, it doesn't mean very much. Take a look at, if something interests you, take a look at it yourself on its own merits. Just because other people had said that, this qualifies for a thing. As I've won a bunch of awards for journalism, I'm going to say they didn't mean anything because my best pieces were completely ignored. So it's just these, some random subjective choice, or it fits into this box in this category. Of course, there's a level of competency for that, but yeah, I really encourage folks for everything, whether it's horror fiction, whether it's just writing in general, whether it's bands, don't just go on what comes across your feed. Make an active effort to search things out there. So look for stuff. You're like, I like Black Sabbath or something like that. I'm going to listen to more Black Sabbath. I'm going to listen to a cover band of Black Sabbath. That's all great. What are there other doom metal bands out there? And I use that because I like some of that stuff. Some of it, a lot of it I'm not a fan of, but there's certain kinds that I really love, and they're not just going to come across my YouTube feed. I have to actively search. So I go to the channels that have this and I listen to a little bit of each. I'm like, not just, oh, cool cover, I will only listen to this, or dumb cover. Like, no, I'm going to give it a try. Okay, all right, that's not for me. It takes a lot more work, but I think that's the heart of indie, and those of us who support independent horror, independent fiction, we have to put in on the other end. We have to make efforts to seek out other people's stuff. We can't just passively expect Amazon to suggest it to us, because they're not there to spread art. They're there to make money. So if they're like, oh, people, this kind of appeals to more people, let's put it out more because we'll be able to sell more of those and get that. That's fine. I'm not saying that people shouldn't read Stephen King. I like Stephen King. This is not to bash on any of that whatsoever. But the idea that Stephen King is basically 90% of the horror reads out there, that's an injustice. I mean, he's in my like top, maybe 50 best favorite horror authors. Like, I really like his stuff, but sorry, Stephen, if you're listening to this, and I know he is.
I'm sure he is.
Totally.
You're a great writer, and you deserve all the acclaim you've gotten. But folks, there are other folks out there, and I found my favorite horror author named Richard Gavin. It's hard to explain his stuff. Some of it is folk horror. I don't even know how to explain it, but I was at a used bookstore, and I just searched the shelves, and there was a title, Sylvan Dread. It was just the words. And I was like, what is this? And I opened it up. I was like, holy shit, and it's my favorite book, and he's my favorite author. I didn't find him through an Amazon suggestion. I didn't find him through a Facebook ad. I found him literally at a bookstore, and he's like opened up my mind to so much in the horror world. And I did that because I have been actively searching. So don't look at it as a duty. Look at it as this joy, and you're going to find things that you might not have found otherwise.
Yeah, for sure. That's how I discovered Anaya Alborn. Just cruising around, and I saw one of her books on a shelf, and I thought, oh, female horror writer, I think I'll buy this. And now she's like, I removed Stephen King books off my shelf to make room for hers, because she's just really great. But yeah, that's how I found her too. So,
well, now Stephen King has stopped listening to the podcast.
Well, forget him. We don't know. I'm just kidding. He's probably got, voodoo doll of me sticking pins in me, I'm sure. Yeah, the marketing piece for authors of any ilk is quite difficult. And I think there is strength in numbers for us, for sure, to be sort of helping each other get the word out about our books and our works. And Denver Horror Collective doesn't just cater to authors. I mean, we also do screenplays and artists, visual artists as well. Mm-hmm. So, any horror creative can find a home at Denver Horror Collective.
We have our book cult, which we call it.
Yeah.
Which we just started up, and that's basically, we do it every 3 months, so people don't feel too much pressure. It's been virtual. We've been picking a Colorado horror author, and we just had the vote. I haven't looked to see how the votes are being tallied for the next one, but basically we do a critique, or not a critique necessarily, but a discussion, and then we actually invite the author to do a Q&A. And we had last week, I guess it was a couple weeks ago, Steve Rasnick-Tem, who is an
Amazing.
incredible, world-renowned author who lives here in Colorado. And he was kind enough to do Q&A with us. So that is our premise. And they have to be willing to do a Q&A with us for us to buy and read their book. And so that's kind of our thing. So you could be anywhere in the country and tap into that if you're interested. Just, denverhorror.com. You can find all that stuff. Sign up for the Epitaph newsletter. And even if you don't live here and you're like, that's stupid, I don't want to be a part of Denver Horror Collective, start up your own thing wherever you live, right? This is a model that can be replicated anywhere, and we don't have ownership of the model. I end up doing a fair amount behind the scenes, but we have a whole steering committee of people who do a bunch of stuff. It's not my thing. It's an open source concept, and come up with yours. Come up with the Austin Horror Collective. Come up with the Podunk Horror Collective. Wherever you live, you can do it.
Yeah. Oh, we forgot to mention too. We have the Dark Lit going on as well. So if you are going into a bookstore and you're like, there's so many things, if you go to Denver Horror Collective's Dark Lit page, you'll be just amazing things are there for you to pick from. And they aren't just, I think there's 2 Denver Horror Collective anthologies, but then anybody who's a part of our group, their stuff, which is published by all sorts of different places, is also there to give you a wide selection of things to read. So you don't have to go to Amazon and run around blindly and try to figure out what to do. We have it on the website for you.
It's Denver Horror Collective members, and the Dark Lit Market. It's just denverhorror.com/Dark Lit Market, I believe, and you can check out all that stuff. And every week we do Terror Tuesday, where we put out a new author through our social media and whatnot, which Joy is an active part, as well as Brenda. So check that out and become a part of it. You join as a member. It's $20 a month. It's cheaper than any other entity, and trust me, you get plenty of bang for your buck.
For sure.
Absolutely.
$20 a year. Did I say $20 a month?
You said a month, and I was just thinking in the back of my mind, holy crap, I'm behind on payments.
Me too. I was like, I think I owe some money.
Make that very clear. $20 a year for Denver Horror. That's all. Yeah, $20 a month. Maybe at some point. It's what I meant to say is it's worth $20 a month, but
it is.
It's only $20 a year.
Yeah,
it definitely is worth it for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And we will make sure that we put all those links into the notes for the video and for the audio podcast too, along with links to find your book at Godless. Now, will the print book be on Godless as well? I'm not sure, actually. I don't think so. But you can go to joshsworstnightmare.com. Okay. So that's my website. You can sign up for my newsletter, and I will keep you abreast of that. But it'll be available through Amazon, and then likely possibly through other booksellers. Okay.
As well. But sign up for the newsletter. I don't just talk about myself. I do a fair amount. I even sent out one issue where I was like, what would people be interested in besides me just talking to myself? And people didn't necessarily respond to that. I was like, all right, fine. I'll keep. But I do this one thing called haiku horror reviews. So I take biological horror books that I read and I make a haiku out of it. Basically, it's not really a review, but it's a blurb about the book. And so I like to promote other biological horror authors. And I'm going to be tying that more into the podcast. So then whoever my author is for that month, or week, I think I'm going to do the podcast weekly. We'll see what happens. But check into that if you like biological horror, if you like any of the topics I talked about. Another thing is, if you're like, it sounds like his stuff is terrible, sign up for my stuff and buy it for somebody you don't like. So that's always an option.
Oh, that's a bonus right there. Maybe I'll send copies to all the ladies from that original writing group that told me not to come back.
You should send them all a signed copy of your stuff.
I should, but actually,
I wish I
maybe I will.
I quit myself out of the group. You were actually erased from it, so that's a better story than mine.
I was erased. Yeah, I was. So I guess, really, I just left there relieved that I didn't show them some of my other stuff, because I thought the There's Something Up There was pretty tame, really. So
I mean, it was wild, but yeah, it was not a disturbing story. And yeah, if you're that squeamish, you're into different stuff. That's fine too.
whatever. So Josh, what are you working on now? What is your current project?
So it is a novel called Charwood for right now. It's the working title. And it is what I'm calling a modern American Jewish environmental folk horror novel. So,
Wow.
another one of those. And so it's a fun one. It's the folk horror concept I've been really into. I've been always into it, and I didn't realize it was a genre. And really, they've only started to define it over the last several years. In the past, when people were making, quote, folk horror, they weren't calling it folk horror. It's just, this is horror. But basically, the folk horror, there are specific principles that people assign to it, but to be more vague, it's just to do with ritual, isolation, that kind of stuff. So the typical one, of course, is Wicker Man stuff where, I mean, spoiler alert for Wicker Man. If you haven't seen Wicker Man at this point, that's your fault. But basically the pagan stuff, kind of. But mine is a modern take on that, and I wanted to tie environmental stuff into it, but not in a preachy way. And
Right.
it's really not. It's definitely not in a preachy way. And I wanted to tie this Jewish components into it as well. So I've been researching aspects of that, and all of that is at play. And it does take place in Colorado. And yeah, I think folks are gonna enjoy it. I'm planning to have it finished by the end of 2021. We'll see. I'm the second draft. I'm on like chapter 8, which is probably only like I don't know, a quarter of the way through or something like that. But that's my goal. And I would like to have that out in 2022 if somebody will want to publish it.
Well, if they pick up mine, then maybe we can do like a book tour together, because mine's
you go.
definitely folk horror too. So,
Cool.
well, you know, I love that stuff
Sure. Yeah.
because I lived it.
Sure. Definitely.
That sounds really, really cool. I can't wait to. Actually, I need to read your chapters, that were uploaded.
Yeah, I've gotten to see a sneak peek of the first, I think it was 3 chapters, maybe.
Yeah,
it was
it's
3.
chapters to the first.
I'm hooked. I'm already, like I said, I'm already invested in this character, and I want to know what happens. I have to see it through now.
Good.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I can tell. I'm already like feeling the little shivers up my spine because I know something really horrifying is about to occur here in the next several chapters. I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of it.
It's a fun one. And I'm trying, and I noticed we didn't bring it up in the critique group, and I don't know if anyone will even be interested in this, but because it's folk horror in my mind, I want to have a folksy aspect to it. So I'm really trying very hard to strip down the language and simplify the sentence structures and the words. I like words. I try not to use words just to be fancy, but sometimes the fancy word does seem to be the best fit. But what I'm doing is I'll go back and I'll be like, I want this flow. I want this simple, folksy, woodsy talk. So if it's a sentence that is very complicated, instead, I won't even necessarily use the word complicated, right? And this is hard. So to go back, I'll be like, that sentence was tough. You know what I mean? So that's what I'm experimenting with. And I want to have that feel of just being able to breeze through it, and that simplicity, which will be a very hard won simplicity, right? It's kind of harder to write really like William Blake, just like the perfect word in each circumstance. My first sentences end up to be a little too wordy. Like I tend to be a wordy person in that way. And because that's what occurs to me. Like, I'm just going to snatch this one and use it. It's not always the best thing. So it's, in a sense, I'm trying to write it like a children's book, in a sense, not the plot. Children, don't read my books, please.
No, don't read this book if you are a child or if you are childish. No, because the first
around a child,
little bit there is a little bit intense. Even just the beginning is kind of intense. But I didn't pick up on the sentence structure, but now I'll be keeping an eye out for that.
Well, I'm hoping that's a positive thing, and that you didn't notice it because it just.
No, I did not.
That's kind of what I'm going for. I don't want the author to be like, "Oh, cool, he's dumbing it down." Like that's not necessarily what I'm doing. I'm just.
Oh no, I didn't pick up on it at all. Not at all. So good job on that.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to The Burial Plot with your host, Brenda Tolian and Joy Yaley. You can find Brenda at
BrendaTolian.com.
and you can find me, Joy Yaley, at joyyaley.com. We hope that you've enjoyed our inquest of Josh Schlossberg. Josh, where can we find out more about you, your work, your podcast, your novels, all of the stuff that you're doing?
Well, I don't think people need to really find out more about me, but you can check out my work at joshsworstnightmare.com. And yeah, whatever you do, don't Google my name, please.
Oh, just for that, I'm going to go Google you immediately. See what kind of riffraff I'm hanging out with here lately. All of those links will be in the show notes for those of you that did not have a pen ready. And we just would like to thank everyone so much for listening. Josh, thank you so much for being our guest. And until next time, stay above ground.